Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Hello. You're here again, smiled Giddy wryly as her cousin met her on the doorstep of her grandmother's house. Grandma Cassie lived in a beautiful two-story mansion on the very outskirts of the district center. The village was in a picturesque place. There was a garden, a forest, and a rivulet. There used to be a whole farm, but with the death of the grandfather of the head of the family, it was noticeably thinned out. Grandmother Cassie, of course, tried to keep both jobs for people and livestock, but it was hard to cope with it all alone. Once upon a time, Cassie and David had been the most respected people in the village. They were honored by all the locals. They raised cattle on their own. David built a huge house in which Cassie became a mistress and gave birth to 2 daughters. The eldest was named Alice. She was kind, soft, gentle. She loved animals, helped her parents in everything, and always looked after her little sister Eva. Eva was 3 years younger than Alice, and she used it as much as she could. From childhood, David noticed that Eva was always scheming, complaining about Alice, setting her up. She'd break a vase and scream that it was Alice. The girls were very different. It's like they weren't even related. When they grew up, Alice was shy to go out with boys and rejected all their advances. Eva, on the other hand, chose suitors, was a coquette. Her main trait in adolescence was greed. She was looking for a richer groom. She didn't mess with the ordinary guys who came to her doorstep in droves. Right after school, Eva found her ideal in the person of the local chairman. He had the most expensive car, the most beautiful suit. He was deeply married with children, but Eva was determined to win him back. It didn't matter that he was 2 decades older. He became infatuated with the young woman, took her to the city, to cafes and restaurants, bought expensive clothes. Eva got pregnant by him, hoping he would abandon his family, but all she could get from him was an apartment in the city. Instead of a monthly child allowance, he bought her an apartment with a written promise that Eva would leave him alone. His family almost broke up then. Eva named her daughter Jenny after his wife. It was a final spit in the face, a sneer on her part. So Eva became a single mother, living in the village with her parents and sister. Eva didn't want to. She moved to the city, to her apartment, and began to search for suitors there, but no one stayed with her longer than 6 months. Alice was modest kind. She fell in love with a military man who was visiting the village with a friend. She fell madly in love and spent the night with him, from which she had a daughter. She named the girl Maidie. But the military man left and never picked up the phone again. Alice decided to leave him alone and live her life. No material claims, her parents helped her raise the child. When her daughter was 5 years old, Alice also moved to the city. She was offered a good job there. Jenny and Maddie saw each other, talked, but they were never friends. 2 different characters, 2 different views on life. Although the girls were yearlings and even went to the same school in the city. When Maddie turned 17, Alice, her mom, got sick. The doctors made a disappointing diagnosis, saying she had no more than a month to live. It was cancer. However, Alice lived almost 3. David was heartbroken. After burying his beloved daughter, he started drinking. Cassie couldn't cope with him and the household. Soon he was gone too. Grief and alcohol drove him to his grave. Thus, he outlived his beloved eldest daughter by only 6 months. When the beloved husband was gone, Cassie's grandmother was also ill. To support her, and at the same time, and to escape from the rented apartment, where even the walls reminded her of her mother dying in her arms, Maidie moved in with her grandmother. She helped her with the household, nursed her back to health, and often had to call an ambulance. Grandma Cassie started giving up. "Half my family is there now, and I miss them. I'm not afraid to die, honey," she told Maddie. Grandma Cassie really missed her second granddaughter and only daughter. But Eva finally got lucky with a man, found a rich old man, and went to live with him, abandoning her daughter like she wasn't her own. Jenny's relationship with her mom hadn't been good from the start, and she'd been surviving on her own as best she could, and as her mother had taught her, going through suitors too. But when Maddie called to say that her grandmother wanted to see her and that she didn't have long to live, Jenny packed her bags and came. She assessed her chances, her charm, and decided she would take the farm for herself. Sell it, use the money to start a business. Jenny had always wanted to open her own cafe or bar, so that the money would flow, and she would walk around in a beautiful outfit and hand out errands. She got her passion for money and luxury from her mother, and so Jenny stood on the doorstep of a beautiful mansion, mentally calculating how much the house could be worth. "Come in, we've been waiting for you," her cousin smiled at her. Maidie was a pretty dark-haired girl, 19 years old, thin as a reed, for she was on her feet all day, keeping the house clean and the kitchen tidy. She was also in charge of the household, communicating with the few workers who tended the cows, pigs, and horses on the property. Jenny, on the other hand, was a dyed blonde with an even, beautiful tan. Slim too, but she didn't have it easy. The extra pounds instantly attached themselves to Jenny, even as she just looked at sweets. The strict diet made her angry, but the result was worth it. Jenny realized that until she got her life together, she couldn't get fat. Her mother, Eva, had gotten better, too, as she aged. But even so, she managed to drive a wealthy businessman 15 years older than herself crazy. Her sister's slimness, for which she made no effort, had always angered Jenny. She also disliked the fact that her grandfather had always been more fond of Maidie, without hiding his feelings. Jenny considered herself resentful and deprived. She hadn't come to the doorstep of this house to be related, or to say goodbye to her grandmother. She had come to get her peace, what she was entitled to. Then she could quit dieting, and no longer hunt the men who wanted only one thing from her. Maddie showed Jenny to the room she occupied every time she came here for the summer. The house was big, and each of the girls had their own room here. Jenny laid out her things, took a shower, and went up to her grandmother's room. Inside was an antique interior. Beautiful carved headboards by the bed and chairs, a closet, a trundle. In the center stood the large bed that Grandma Cassie had always shared with her grandfather. Memories came over the girl. Not long ago he had been here, and now he was gone. Neither was Aunt Alice, Maddie's mother. Jenny sighed. She loved her grandfather, and always wished he had paid more attention to her. "Grandma Cassie?" Jenny called out to her. The gray-haired older woman lifted her head from the pillow and smiled weakly. "Janisha's here. My Janisha. I'm so glad you've come. Where's your mommy?" Grandma Cassie asked. Her speech was slow and quiet. The strength to speak was almost gone. "Mom couldn't make it," Jenny said, taking a seat on the edge of the bed. She remembered calling her a couple days ago. It took a long time to get through. Jenny had told her mother about her grandmother's condition, and she had said she couldn't make it, but she would call her the other day. After talking to her grandmother, Jenny went downstairs where her sister was working on dinner. Outside the window, the weather was nasty fall weather. Jenny felt like the whole world was against her. "How long have you lived here?" Jenny asked her, leaning her hand against the wall. Maidie turned around. She hadn't listened to her sister come downstairs. "You scare me. I've been living here for 4 months. Grandma's getting worse. You know, it's weird. Mom died, Grandpa left, and now Grandma. Do you think she's dying?" Jenny asked with genuine curiosity. Maidie looked at her sister puzzled. "I told you on the phone. The doctors say she doesn't have long to live. Her heart is worn out. If Mom were alive, maybe none of this would have happened." Maddie turned away and continued washing the dishes. Jenny sat down in a chair in the corner of the kitchen. It was where her grandfather used to sit. Jenny noticed that the furniture was almost new. Grandma liked to update the interior. Yes, it was a pity about Aunt Alice. Unfortunately, it's always the wrong ones who die. "What are you talking about?" Maidie burst out. Jenny had already suggested at the funeral that it would have been easier for everyone if her mother had died instead of Maidie's mom. It seemed to Jenny that both she and her mother were disliked here, although, in fact, they both received the same amount of attention, but due to their natural temper, they often scandalized, after which Jenny felt deprived. "Oh, calm down. Aunt Alice was kind. She took care of you. My mom only cares about herself. Okay, I want to go for a walk. Do you mind?" Jenny asked. Jenny walked around the house and the whole farm. She went to the stables and counted the horses. In the big barn, she was surprised at how few cows were left. Wanting to know the reason for the decrease in the number of cows, Jenny went back to the barn. However, there was an unpleasant surprise waiting for her at the door, a large dog named Cat. "You!" Get out of here. Get out, shouted Jenny. The dog's playful mood was shot down flat. The cat just wanted to play, and Jenny punched the dog on the nose. The cat whined and went to the other yard. Maddie ran out to the noise. Your monster almost bit me. I thought that dog was dead, snarled Jenny. I'm sorry. He just likes to play. Not mean at all, smiled Maddie. They found the kitten with Jenny a few years ago when the girls were still in school. A neighbor had taken it to the river to drown it, and it had escaped. It had a pathology, a limp. The neighbor thought it was a defective puppy, so he took it to the river. Maddie caught the puppy and held it in her arms. Just then, a panting neighbor ran up to them. He had been looking for the dog in the woods, afraid it would come running back to his yard. I'll drown him. He's limping. I don't need that kind of protector, he said, and snatched the dog out of the child's hands. Maddie was not bold and determined. At this moment, she could not stand it and screamed. No, don't you dare. Give him to me. I'll feed him myself. Maddie took the puppy from her neighbor. Your grandfather won't let you. He doesn't like dogs. A cat person, the neighbor concluded. He knew this because there were no dogs on the farm. The neighbor had offered to get him a puppy many times, but Grandpa David had refused. But there were plenty of cats on the farm, a dozen. There was plenty of milk, and the owners were happy to take in lost and foundlings. Maddie won the puppy back. Throw it away. Don't wear it. Grandpa won't let you keep the dog, Jenny repeated to her neighbor. Then we'll call him a cat. Cat. That'll be his name. Maddie kept the puppy in the farthest shed. Every day she'd say, I'll get food for the cat. And Jenny giggled because the grandparents thought she was going to feed some cat, not realizing they had a dog named Cat. The truth was revealed when the grandfather heard barking. The cat had settled down on the farm by then and felt at home in that barn. Who's that barking? He asked him sternly. It's Cat. Cat, his neighbor drowned him and I saved him. He's limping. Don't kick him out, Maddie begged. Jenny watched from the sidelines. She was waiting for her grandfather to kick the dog out, but he took pity and let the dog stay. Let there be another watchman to help pull, Grandpa smiled. Jenny thought then that if she had brought the dog, grandfather wouldn't have allowed it. It seemed to her that Maddie was so pitiful and submissive precisely to control everyone around her. The next morning, Jenny woke up around 8 in the morning, decided to make her grandmother happy with breakfast. She had to start making her feel comfortable. She obviously didn't have long to stay, and that time could be tolerated. For the sake of a house like this, she certainly could. Jenny cooked a simple porridge with milk, made tea, and went up to the second floor with a tray. As she entered the bedroom, she saw that her grandmother was already awake. Good morning, Grandma. And I made you breakfast with delivery right to the bedroom, smiled the beautiful blonde. Good morning, sweetheart. Maddie and I have already had breakfast. We get up early, 6:00 a.m. in the summer. We get up even earlier. Maddie feeds the ducks, helps us get the cows out. I'm used to getting up early, you know. Jenny tried not to show her displeasure, so she put the tray down carefully and sat down on her grandmother's bed. I guess I'll have breakfast on my own then. Here with you? I've missed you so much. Jenny ate her porridge and drank her own tea, talking about her life in the city where she worked, talked about her mom. More complaining, Jenny had had grudges against her mother since she was a little girl. Deep down, she realized that she was only a means to an end for her, not a desired child. After all, for her birth, the local chairman had bought them an apartment. Toward lunchtime, Jenny met Maddie. She was working in the yard, sweeping. Why do you do everything yourself? No help? Jenny asked. No. They're all busy. How hard can it be? There's a broom in the corner by the gate. Would you like to join me? Maddie suggested, realizing that her sister had never held a broom in her hands in her life. She'd only ever pressed the button on the vacuum cleaner. Thank you, I guess. At that moment, Jenny saw her grandmother watching them from the window. She pursed her lips in displeasure and grabbed the broom. Maddie waved her grandmother's hand. Taking the broom, Jenny did the same. The day passed in labor and worry. Maddie got her sister involved in the cooking as well. She was curious as to what Jenny had come for. After all, she never did anything for nothing. There was always some sort of benefit. When dinner time came, Maddie prepared a tray for grandmother, but her sister had a dead grip on it. I'll carry it myself. Let me do it, Maddie smiled. You see Grandma every day, and I just got here. Let me be with her. Or are you just jealous, like when I was a kid?" Jenny said angrily, not removing the unpleasant smile from her mouth. "When we were kids, we were loved equally, and you just don't know what kind of medicine Grandma takes." Maddie raised her eyebrows, looking at her sister in surprise. Jenny took a step aside, giving her sister the tray. "I'm coming with you. I want to know what medicine Grandma is taking," Jenny said. The sisters went upstairs. Maddie explained to her sister what pills Grandma had to take. Jenny listened half-heartedly. Her attention was drawn to the expensive antique interior of the bedroom. She had already mentally priced her grandmother's jewelry. "Ganesha wanted to sit with you. She said she missed you," Maddie said, and her sister nodded happily, feigning goodwill. "That's good. I missed her too." The old lady smiled. "Let her stay with you tomorrow then, and I'll go into town. I need to get some medicine and something from the vet's pharmacy for the horses," Maddie suggested. Jenny agreed happily. Her sister had given her the perfect opportunity to show her grandmother care and love. Is it too much to ask of old people? Jenny decided that she would read a book to her grandmother and feed her. But instead, Maddie reminded her sister once again about the medication and told her that tomorrow she needed to take Grandma to the shower to help her bathe. She liked to do that in the morning after breakfast. Then she told her what time she had to go to the bathroom. Showed her what clothes Jenny should wear. When Maddie left, Grandma immediately asked her granddaughter to take her to the shower. "I love bathing," she smiled. Jenny had to not only undress her grandmother, but also rub her back and everything else. At this very moment, Maddie was giggling behind the wheel of a simple domestic car, and Grandma was smiling slyly in the shower, realizing how much Jenny hated doing all this. That evening, when Maddie returned, Jenny was sitting in the kitchen, drinking a whiskey she found in the cupboard. "What hard day." The dark-haired beauty raised her eyebrows naively. Maddie was wearing tight khaki pants and a simple white t-shirt. Her long hair, almost to her waist, was pulled back into a simple ponytail. Beautiful wide eyebrows, slanted eyes, a graceful curve of lips, and a thin little snub nose. Jenny had always envied her beauty. Maddie, on the other hand, didn't pay the slightest attention to her looks and didn't even bother with makeup. "Yeah," Jenny said, pouring a new drink. "You should at least have an appetizer," Maddie suggested, taking a sliced ham and cheese out of the fridge. Jenny took the treat from her plate and began to eat. "Did you give Grandma the pills?" Maddie asked. The blonde with the glass of liquor nodded, remembering that she only gave the pills in the morning. She hadn't even remembered them at lunch or in the evening. Her grandmother must have forgotten to. Her memory was failing her. Years. Cassie's grandmother had turned 87 last month. The next week was a week of hard work. Jenny was trying to fill in for Maddie. She went to great lengths to bathe the old lady, help her to the bathroom. She did it on purpose to show that she was not squeamish. In reality, Jenny barely tolerated the old woman's very presence. She felt no emotion towards her, maybe when she was a child. But then it seemed to her that her grandmother had paid more attention to Maddie. Maybe because she lacked attention from her mother, she demanded special treatment from her grandparents. Jenny wasn't overzealous. Cooking for Maddie's grandmother, the girl was afraid that Jenny would inadvertently poison her grandmother or give her indigestion, so she tried to do everything herself. Jenny proudly took the food to her, letting her know that she had done everything herself. And Grandma Cassie nodded and smiled at her granddaughter, knowing full well who was such a good cook. So Jenny thought she was the most cunning, but it's not easy to outsmart a man who is half a century older than you. After Jenny fed her grandmother dinner, she would go for a walk around the house. In fact, Jenny was assessing the area, looking at what else was valuable, planning how she would put together a listing, what she would emphasize. It was not just a nice house, but a lot of outbuildings and livestock. It's also very picturesque, and you have to pay extra for the view. That's when Maddie went up to see Grandma Cassie. "So, how's it going?" her granddaughter asked. "You know, I already want that scheming girl out of the house. She's been talking all day today about how much she loves me, and she kept insinuating that you were talking bad about me behind my back," the old lady said. "Well, we're not gonna kick her out," Maddie smiled. "Of course we're not. You know what she said? That you're tired of washing me, and you're planning to go to the city." "Yeah." Maddie laughed. Grandma Cassie laughed too. "Well, I guess I'll go pack then. By the way, is she giving you pills?" Matey said more seriously. Grandmother nodded, trying to remember. Jenny gave her medicine, but not every time. She'd forget, and sometimes she'd give her only one pill instead of 5 on purpose. I realized what she needed. She'd already asked twice to have the house signed over to her, Grandma Cassie told me, holding her favorite granddaughter's hand. It was to be expected. I was hoping she'd have some humanity in her. It's just greed, Matey said sadly. But she's not getting anything. You can split the will between the two of you. You shouldn't have left everything to me alone. There's not on Eva. She'd be hurt. Maddie didn't want to be the sole heiress. She didn't care about material things. It was important to her that her grandmother lived because she was the last soulmate in the whole world. After her mom died, Maddie had grown attached to her. And Grandma missed her husband, Grandpa David. So they found each other. They talked for hours about all kinds of stuff. Maddie trusted her grandmother with all her secrets, and she told her about her youth. You can learn so many interesting things from old people. For example, grandchildren always think that Grandma and Grandpa lived from youth to old age, soul to soul. But Grandma Cassie, already after her grandfather's death, told how she caught him with another woman when she was young, and that he probably had a child on the side. She herself was also in love with the local letter carrier, and after learning of her husband's infidelity, she nearly broke up the marriage, cheating on him for a year with that man. Grandpa David caught them. There was a fight. There was a village-wide scandal. In the end, he swore he wouldn't cheat again, and so did Grandma. And they both went left for a long time after that. Grandma understood perfectly well that grandfather cannot go fishing every weekend and come back without fish. And one day she found a price tag in a bag of fish, which he allegedly caught, and it all added up. His mistress worked at the store, but Grandma didn't reproach him because she herself ran off to the hayloft every time to the incredibly charming mailman. He was a handsome, ambitious fellow who later on swayed the postmaster and took his place. At the time all these events were taking place, Grandma was already in her arms with little Alice. Pregnant for the second time, she was almost certain that the child was not from her husband. She was terrified and broke off all relations with the letter carrier. She had a family to save. If David found out she was carrying someone else's baby, he'd leave her. He threatened to take Alice away and leave if she didn't end her affair. And he cheated. Nen. Who can understand them? The grandmother didn't tell her granddaughter. She was ashamed. She swore she'd take the secret to her grave. When Eve was born, David knew at the first sight of her that she wasn't his. She looked a lot like the mailman's face, and he knew it all at once. Was it his? He asked, keeping his eyes on the child. Cassie was silent. What could she say? It was obvious. She was more ashamed and scared than ever. I heard you Diana's pregnant too, and she's got a man who's infertile. What are we gonna do? Divorce? She asked me straight out. Divorce was rare back then. David wasn't going to break up the family. He just wasn't getting laid. Cassie was cheating out of spite. He could do it, but she couldn't. David took little Eva in his arms. Here's what we're gonna do. We'll name her after my mother, Eve, and I'll dump Diana. Tonight, she won't leave her husband anyway. Convinced him the doctors were wrong and he's not barren. He's glad. He's a fool. But Eva is the first, and she's our second child. It's okay. Eva is our daughter. Yours and mine, and don't you ever even think about anyone else. There was nothing. No one. Not you, not me. Do you understand? Cassie nodded. From that day on, there was no more cheating in their lives. Cassie wanted more children, but she couldn't get pregnant again. That letter carrier had long since passed away on a drunken errand, and there was no news of Diana's fate with David's child. They had moved to Lithuania just after the baby was born. It was a boy. Maybe that's why Eva was not like her own sister at all. She was not 100% blood related to Yaroslava, only a half-sister. The greedy character of the letter carrier lover and his beautiful features were in both her and her daughter Jenny. One wonders how, without knowing the story, Eva chose the name for her daughter. After all, that mailman's Jenny's Jeninton. The next morning, Jenny went up to her grandmother's house with a tray. She had to learn to get up early to show her attitude. The house has to be worked on, she thought. Good morning, Grandma, she said. Breakfast was served. Jenny remembered that she had left the pills on the table downstairs. Whatever about them, she thought. Going downstairs was lazy. She regularly forgot to give her medications. Her grandmother didn't even remember them because the pills improved her memory, and without that she forgot everything. That's why she told Matey that she was taking medicine. Everything was mixed up in her head. "Grandmother, I wanted to ask you, did you make a will for me like we talked about?" Jenny asked, smiling. "Not yet," answered Grandma, sipping her tea. "Rewrite it, or I'm not at peace with it. I don't want our family farm to be sold after you're gone. Maddie wants to go to the city. She talks about it all the time. Yesterday she was just sighing. I can't wait to get out of here. She'll give up everything. And I'm tired of the hustle and bustle. I'm like my grandfather. I can't stand this town. I want to develop the farm, take care of the animals." Grandmother watched her granddaughter lie and twist and nodded affirmatively. "Of course, if you say so, I'll do everything today. You know what? Hand me that thick sketchbook over there." "Ring it over," Grandma asked. Jenny obediently handed over the heavy album. "Listen, granddaughter, this is my will. I'm going to sign it over to you. Right now, I just need quiet. I'm not very good at concentrating. So I don't make any mistakes. Leave me alone for an hour." "Okay," Grandma asked. Jenny nodded happily, gave her grandmother a peck on the cheek, and walked out. Out the door, she wiped her lips as if from dirt and, smiling, went to her room. She was sure it was done. Grandma, meanwhile, was looking at old pictures, nostalgic and grieving for her husband. Wedding photos, the first pictures of their children. Collective photos with friends at weddings. One of the pictures was of the very same mailman. Only now did Cassie notice how much Jenny looked like him. The same face. Of course, David had guessed it all at once. Eva had been born an exact copy of him, and Jenny had inherited her features. Should I tell her? Would it make any difference? Would she find him now? Cassie realized she wouldn't admit to Jenny that her mother had a different father. Eve wouldn't forgive her. Let her find out after she was dead, she decided. So she took a pen and signed on the back of the picture. "If you are reading this, it means I am no longer alive. I must tell you a secret that my David and I have kept all my life. The man in the picture on the left, the mailman, is Eva's real father. Biological. I had an affair with him, but David found out, forgave me, raised Eva as his own daughter. I can't take this secret to the grave with me, so I'm leaving it here on the back of this photo. Eva's father is dead, but she has half-brothers who live in the city. They're rich, they work for the government, I can't remember exactly where. Once you find them, Jenny, you can ask them to help you get a good job. They're always helping their loved ones. The Stones, Paul and Dexter, they're your uncles, Jenny. Go to them and you won't need anything." Finished writing, Grandma put the sketchbook aside and looked out the window. Her bedroom was a side bedroom, and from there she had a good view of the river. David liked to fish there, and Cassie watched him, not daring to go and disturb him. She loved him. Even though he had stumbled, even though she too was not without sin. Love had not come to their seven at once. Their marriage was arranged by their parents. The children gave their consent because they liked each other, but nothing more. It took them a long time to get used to each other, be made on the side, until they saw in each other the most important features that are worthy of respect. And David idolized his wife, and she adored him with all her heart. Unfortunately, when he lost his only daughter, he couldn't cope with the grief and left her early. His binges were like suicide attempts. He drug himself to the point of unconsciousness, and then he'd get really sick. Cassie still regretted that she hadn't listened to the advice of the local doctor and hadn't sent her husband for compulsory treatment in a psychoneurological dispensary. He had had a nervous breakdown depression, and he was drowning it out with vodka, refusing any medication. Toward evening, Jenny went to her grandmother's house again and brought her dinner. "Jenny, my pills," the old woman reminded her. "Yes, I'll get them now, eat for now." Jenny went downstairs. Just then her phone rang. It was her ex-lover. She took the call. She fought with him, then made up with him. He promised to do anything she wanted for her if she came back. Jenny said she had some unfinished business here that would help her get richer. She promised to come back as soon as she finished it. "I look forward to it," he said. Jenny forgot she was on her way to get her pills. She went up to her grandmother's house. "Was it good? I cooked it myself," she lied. Grandma forgot about the pills and began to remember making the casserole for Grandpa. She told Jenny her secret recipe. She didn't listen, just smiled and held her grandmother's hand. As soon as she left the room, she rushed to wash her hand, as if Grandma could infect her with old age. The next morning, Jenny was awakened by footsteps. It was Matey. She was running down the stairs, talking excitedly to someone. "What's wrong?" Jenny jumped to her feet and peeped out of the room. "Grandma won't wake up. I called the doctor." "Jenny, did you give her medicine?" Maddie asked. "Of course." She lied. Maddie opened the pills. The packs she bought in town were almost untouched, and they should be empty by now. "You didn't give her the meds?" screamed Maddie. "I did, honestly. I found another plate. It ran out yesterday. And there was another one, the pink ones, and she refused the brown ones, said they made her sleepy." Jenny was twisting and turning like a frying pan. Maddie realized her sister was lying, but there was no point in arguing now. She ran downstairs and waited for the ambulance to arrive. A woman in her 40s entered the house wearing a white coat. Jenny was beside them, feigning genuine concern and trying not to smile inadvertently. Things were working out just fine for her. She thought her grandmother had rewritten the will for her and immediately gave her soul to God. What could be more beautiful? No more fiddling with her. As soon as the will is read, she'll go to town. In 6 months, she'll inherit the property with peace of mind, and in the meantime, she'll find the best buyers. She decided to sell everything separately. It should be worth more. Your grandmother is in a deep sleep. That's what happens to the elderly before they die. She may wake up and live a little longer, or she may stay there and go quietly, the paramedic explained. After listening to the doctor, Jenny left, while Maddie stayed behind to receive further instructions. The local paramedic knew Medina better than her sister, and she was the one to give instructions about treatment. Meanwhile, in the bedroom, Grandma Cassie was sleeping a sound sleep. She was inside her mind, somewhere deep. She was where her fate was being decided. Her dreams were more like memories. Only she, being in them, realized that what was happening around her was not real. "Marbashenka, my soul, come in quickly. We've been waiting for you," her beloved David said in a low voice. It was their wedding anniversary. At the sumptuous table were gathered the closest people. Their 2 daughters, their little girls Jenny and Maddie. There were also neighbors with whom their family had always been friends. "Well, happy anniversary to us. 40 years of marriage. Oh, my darling." David kissed Cassie and she smiled. Everyone around them was celebrating, and it felt so good, so light and so warm. It was summer. Her body, lying alone in the room under the blanket, was freezing. But there, in the dream, she was suddenly unbearably warm. She was loved again, and nothing hurt, and the memory, like a bud, opened up. Someone was toasting, and Cassie looked at Alice, her dead daughter. "My darling, are you here?" she asked, unable to hold back her tears. "Of course I am, Mom. I'm here. Don't cry. It's your holiday. I love you so much." Alice confessed. She was very beautiful in her purple dress. Her shoulder-length black hair was curly. Cassie looked at the girls. They were about 5 or 7 years old. They were sitting at the table and giggling. They are friendly. They haven't faced the vicissitudes of fate yet, and they're doing just fine. All the people closest to them are here. But there was someone else missing. Cassie turned around and saw her parents at the end of the table. They weren't young, but they weren't old either. She remembered exactly. Her parents hadn't been there for their 40th wedding anniversary. They had already died at that time. Her granddaughters had never seen them, for their great-grandparents had left this world long before they were born. "Daddy, Mommy, are you here?" Cassie asked. It was then that she realized she must be dead. "Don't be afraid," her father told her, as if he had read her mind. Cassie walked over to her parents and cuddled up to them. They hugged her. Suddenly, everyone got up from the table and went somewhere. David was the last to go. He turned around at the door. "There's going to be fireworks. Do you want to come with us?" Cassie saw the empty table. Outside the window were everyone she loved, her husband, her daughter, her son. But out there in the house, Maddie was still being plotted against by her evil sister Jenny. And the household, how would she leave them? David heard her thoughts again. "Don't worry, they'll be fine. They've been ready for this for a long time. You've lived a long life. You're missed around here. You were so good when you were alive. They even let you choose. They took me right away, in silence. And I didn't get here right away. I was working off a sin. You can stay here with us right away. Your parents miss you all the time, but they haven't left you all this time. You know, neither have I. Come with us. You coming?" He held out his hand to her, and Cassie smiled. She felt young in that moment, and her smile was that of a young woman. It's not for nothing they say that a soul is always young. Cassie stood there, not knowing what to do. She realized that it was her choice who she would stay with. She figured she could always make it here in time, and there were other things to do back at the house. What to choose? At that moment, Matey came up to her and touched her arm. "Grandmother, you just live, my darling," whispered Matey. Cassie heard it. In that moment, she made a decision. The only right one. She took David's hand and walked out with him to watch the fireworks with the others. "Don't worry, she'll be hurt, but she'll get through it. You did the right thing, and her good deeds will save her many times over. We'll be watching with you." They held hands and crossed the threshold. Cassie saw thousands of fireworks. The beauty was astounding, and the feeling of love and happiness was so palpable that she wanted to cry with joy. Nearby were those who no longer needed to be mourned. At that very moment, her breathing stopped. Maddie tried to help, then cried on her grandmother's chest. Behind her, Jenny stood silently, as emotionless as she was, and her grandmother's death had shaken her. Death couldn't help but shake her. "She's gone," whispered Maddie through her tears. Jenny walked over and hugged her sister. They both needed it. There was a commotion in the house. The news of Grandma's death had stunned all the workers and fellow villagers. She was loved and respected. She often helped people in any way she could. An ambulance arrived and the paramedic recorded her death. No autopsy was required in her years. Wise local grandmothers organized everything as it should be. They told Maybe how to bathe her properly, what to wear, where to order a coffin. The hustle and bustle passed getting by. She wasn't in shock for long. Finally, it was safe to think about going into town. Her Wayne was waiting for her already. He wasn't a bad match for her, except that they fought a lot. But he loved her. He left his wife for her. She decided to give him a chance. While everyone bustled about, bathing her grandmother, dressing her for her final journey, Jenny slipped into her room to read the will. She was sure her grandmother had written it. She had promised her, after all. Jenny shook through the entire scrapbook, but there was no will, so she opened the closet and found the paper in it. It even had a notary signature. "Well, of course it's done in front of a notary. What a fool I am," whispered Jenny, reading the actual will. Only now did she realize that no one was going to sign the house over to her. Everything was going to Matey. Everything. The only thing in the will was an old photo album. It was full of baby pictures of her mother, Alice. Also, in it lay a photo that could explain to Jenny her true origins and point to relatives who could help her rise to a high position in society. But Jenny didn't care about that. She wasn't going to get nostalgic flipping through the pictures. She was furious. "Damn old woman, I hate you. Bird in hell," she said aloud, throwing the album at the wall. Jenny took the will back to her room, wondering what to do with it. She sat in her bedroom and rubbed the sheet in her hands. "You tricked me. You will pay for this. I'm your granddaughter too. And my mom is alive, unlike Pebble's mom. You could have split it between the three of us, but you gave it all to her alone. She just started sucking up to you earlier, sucking up to you. She had more foresight, but it won't help her." Jenny waited for her grandmother to be put in the coffin, walked over to her, and slipped the will under her arm. "Go on, tell everyone now, if you can." "The old hag," whispered Jenny with a smile. The fear and grief were gone without a trace. Greed and resentment took their place. No one slept that night. Jenny, pretending to be a loving granddaughter, helped in the kitchen. In the morning, everything was ready. Maddie and Jenny passed out exhausted. By noon, the house was full of people. Everyone had come to say goodbye to Cassie to see her off. The granddaughters wore black. Maddie was crying, while Jenny pretended to hold on. The casket was carried to the cemetery by local men. The grave had already been prepared. Even Maddie's dog Cat was there to say goodbye. The dog sat peacefully off to the side, whimpering. When everyone had gone around the circle, touching the hand of the deceased, the dog came to the coffin. "Who gets the house?" one of the workers asked. "Mighty," they probably answered him. "No, Grandma Cassie had voiced her last will and testament. She wanted the house to go to me. Maddie Grandma only wanted to keep some of the livestock so she could raise her own farm," Jeannie said loudly. Maddie looked at her sister in bewilderment. At that moment, she realized that her sister would take everything from her, and Maddie wouldn't have the nerve to sue her relative. Maddie lowered her eyes to take one last look at her grandmother. Tears spattered from her eyes. Now she wouldn't have a roof over her head either. She knew Guinea, and she knew she would leave her nothing. At that very moment, the dog burrowed his muzzle into the coffin, whining and barking. "You Bekissy the dog! You what?" shouted someone from the crowd. But the dog had already withdrawn. In his teeth, Cat held a rolled-up scroll, the will that Jenny had put in the coffin with her grandmother. Jenny saw the paper and rushed to the dog, but the dog had already handed it to the farm manager. "What's this, Cat? Let's see." The man took the paper in his hands, and Jenny immediately turned away. She realized her deception had been exposed. "Maddie, look what I found," he shouted. "I will," said the second worker, poking his curious head into the sheet. The dog sat contentedly beside the manager. "Maddie is the heiress. Maddie is the sole heir. And who's the one who put the will in the coffin?" he asked. Everyone looked at Jenny. "I didn't go near her. What are you looking at?" lied the blonde in black. Soon the farewell continued. Grandma was buried next to Grandpa. Now they would be together forever. The document was left with the manager. It was seen by outsiders. There was nothing to be done. Jenny came home and started packing. "You're leaving?" Maddie appeared behind her sister's back. "Yes. Grandma's gone. The house is all yours. There's nothing more for me to do here." Maddie watched her sister breathe venom and didn't know how to react. "How could you? Grandma had made her will. Did you want to take it all for yourself?" Maddie asked. "And now you've taken it all for yourself." Jenny wheezed. She had changed her clothes and was now wearing a pink blouse and simple blue jeans. The morning was over. I nursed her back to health. I love these places. "Jenny, you can always come. Your room is yours to keep. It's your home too. No matter what the papers say. You can come here all the time with your friends or by yourself. I don't want to fight over money. And I'll keep the place running. I'm not a city girl. I don't like the city. I'll stay, but you must come." She wanted to keep at least a bad peace with her sister. Anything was better than a good fight. But Jenny said nothing. She left without even thinking of staying for the wake, which was to be held tomorrow. A dog barked at her on the doorstep. Jenny flinched, but walked on by, thinking she would never get a dog. Already that evening she found herself in town, in Wayne's arms. Told him her sad story. "I know it hurt," he replied, hugging her naked body under the blanket. "I know it is. We're both granddaughters, but she's the only one who got everything. Why don't my loved ones love me?" "I love you," he said, kissing her on the lips. "You know, I'd burn the house down for that matter. Nobody's gonna get you. If they don't want to share fairly, let them sit with nothing. Why should you be the only one left with nothing? Share it with your sister. I hate lying saints." Wayne said. That day the thought crept into Jenny's head that she needed to get revenge on her little sister. Jenny decided to put revenge on hold. She tried to get a job. All the good jobs were taken. All she could find was a job as a waitress in an expensive restaurant. There was nowhere to go. It was a month after Cassie's grandmother died. That day, Jenny had more bad luck than usual. One customer groped her, another complained about her to her boss. She was reprimanded, lost her bonus. She got home and heard a voicemail from Maddie. "Sis, come over. I'm sad here all by myself. I wish we could live here together." "She's kidding," said Jenny quietly. "She's taking everything and laughing at her." She called an old acquaintance of hers, Kinski, in the village. He answered the phone. Jenny said there was a case she was willing to pay well for. "Are you serious? You want to burn your sister? In the house? That's criminal." He shook his head. "What if I tell the local police that you smoke pot and grow something illegal on your property? Would you like to be paid or intimidated?" Jenny insisted. During her stay in the village, she often walked past Kinski's house and saw what he was growing. They chatted a couple of times, and Kinski liked her. He was a young guy, not long out of the army. He worked for a local farmer, and he was a dealer in illegal drugs. Jenny had bought a joint from him once herself to help with her nerves. Being there for the old lady was really hard on her. "Pay up. Pay well. Mind you, if there's any casualties, it's on you. I didn't want to do it. You made me do it." Yeah, you're the saint and I'm the bastard. You're going to steal gas from someone else. Do it tonight." Jenny transferred almost all the money to his card and waited for news. Her mood lifted. She felt happy. but no one ever called her. She dialed Kinski herself when it was nearly midnight. Did he drink the money and pass out? She was angry. Drowning in ignorance, Jenny fell asleep and woke up at noon to the doorbell ringing. Jenny? Arrested for organizing a crime under article. Jenny couldn't hear anything further. Her ears were ringing. In that instant, she regretted her decision. Had that village idiot gotten caught after all? And ratted her out? Had the house burned down? She asked as she was being led handcuffed to the car. No, you're lucky no one was hurt. Jenny let out a groan of disappointment and climbed into the car. It's not like that. Last night, Kinski doused the fence and part of the house with gasoline, set it on fire, and ran away. But he didn't get far. The cat got off his chain and chased him. At the barking of the dog woke up the watchman Bullet, who helped the dog to apprehend the arsonist and extinguish the house. Thankfully, nothing was burned. However, the fire reached the open window to her grandmother's bedroom, which Maddie had left open to ventilate. The flames reached the bed through the curtain and marred the interior. The exterior paneling of the house was damaged, and some other items inside the room were burned, like the photo album. So Jenny, without knowing it herself, had burned the one thing that could have brought her wealth. She could have found out that she had powerful relatives, could have rubbed herself in their trust, and gotten a good job. While the fire was being put out, both Kinski and the dog that guarded him were completely forgotten. The scared and stoned guy tried to run away, but the dog grabbed him. He kicked it as hard as he could and hit it in the ribs, breaking them. When the fire was put out, Kinski was gone and the dog was unconscious. Poor cat, he woke me up with his barking. And he caught Kinski, complained the guard. Maddie grabbed the dog, put him in the car, and started driving like crazy to the city. She arrived at a veterinary clinic that was open 24 hours a day and brought the huge dog in her arms. She smelled like smoke, her face and clothes were soiled. But the only thing Maddie cared about at that moment was keeping Cat alive. She decided she wasn't going to let death take the dog away from her as well. Hurry, please. What's wrong? A doctor came running out of the office, apparently dozing off. The name on his badge was Devin. I don't know. He saved us from a fire, and he was injured. He's breathing, and his heart's beating, and he's twitching his paw. I'm gonna die right here if you don't save him. I swear to you. Maddie was crying and screaming, and she scared the young specialist. He took the dog to the office where he took x-rays and saw the fractures. Surgery was next. Maddie sat in the corner of the room, right on the floor, unable to remember the horror she felt when she woke up that night and saw the fire devouring everything in the yard. She had never been so frightened before, and her grandmother was gone, and her grandfather. And Mom, too much all at once fell on this girl's shoulders. She just couldn't accept the death of the dog. She couldn't think straight from the pain, and she was crying all the time. An hour later, the doctor left the office with a droopy expression on his face. Maddie realized that Cat was gone and passed out. She couldn't take it all. She just couldn't. Everyone was dead. The house had almost burned down. And her favorite affectionate four-legged friend had died trying to protect her. She sagged into the black void from which the handsome, dark-haired vet had retrieved her a couple minutes later. Maddie recoiled from the smelling salts. I'm sorry, I've been told not to come out to people with that look on your face after surgery. I'm just very focused. And your dog is alive. You know, at one point, I thought that was it. But no, the dog wanted to live. He fought, and I was able to stop the bleeding. I can't promise he'll be okay, but for now, he's stable. He'll sleep for a long time. We can't take him back yet. You feeling better? Why don't you tell me what happened? Maddie shook her head in disbelief. Show him to me. I need to see that Cat's alive. Cat. The doctor didn't understand. It's his nickname. Cat. Let me see Cat. The doctor took the stubborn girl to the room where the dog was lying. The instruments showed a heartbeat, a pulse. Maddie touched the soft fur of the pet. He was warm. His heart was beating. Thank you, she cried again and hugged him. Even smiled and hugged her too. I've never met such a sensitive and loving hostess. Let me buy you a coffee. Maddie, on emotions, told the handsome doctor everything about herself, how her relatives died one after another, how the house was set on fire, how she fought the fire, and how she found the dog unconscious. As she talked it out, she felt relieved and ashamed that she'd taken it all out on a complete stranger. But Evan was kind to her. They talked until morning. Evan reported that the dog's condition was stable and there was no danger. Then, Maddie said goodbye to him and went home, where another unpleasant surprise awaited her. A police officer who arrived on the scene quickly found the stone Kinski. He was hiding in his home in a Pajini. His giant supply of pop was discovered, and Kinski immediately ratted out Jeannie. Told her how she threatened to expose him, how she paid him off. He had messages on his phone from Jeannie when she couldn't reach him that made sense. When Maddie found out that her sister had set the house on fire, she was again in a state of shock. She felt like talking to her or helping her in some way. You know, it's a family matter. Can we let her go? I'm not going to write any statements, she asked the police officer. But he shook his head glumly. It's too late. I solved the crime and filed all the papers. Where were you before? He asked. I was at the veterinary clinic with the dog. I'm sorry, your sister won't get much time. Don't worry about it. Maddie stayed home. Together with the workers, they tried to clean up the arson, and they worked late into the evening. Maddie fell asleep before she got to the shower, exhausted from all the stress and the recent events. She forgot to call the clinic to ask how Kat was doing. The next morning, she was awakened by a phone call. Maddie, hi, you have a call from the veterinary hospital. Your dog's recovered here. He's better. We can take him in. We'll just need someone to keep him on antibiotics for a couple more days. Maddie recognized the doctor's voice. He'd gotten under her skin. She cried into his robe and fainted there and told him more about herself that she should have. I'll be there. An hour later, she was already standing in front of the handsome man and stroking her favorite. He was already on his feet, though he limped. His ribs still hurt, of course. I'll have the painkillers with me, add them to the food, and the injections. Maddie listened to him and her heart sank. She thought it was out of place, out of time. After paying at the register, she picked up the dog, said goodbye to Evan, and left. Well, he didn't show any interest in me. What made me think he liked me? I just came off as the worst kind of hysterical, she told the dog on the way home. At home, her usual work awaited her again. The refrigerator was empty. She'd completely forgotten to cook for herself and buy groceries. Maddie took a shower and lay down. The cat was in the house now and lay on the bed with her. She changed his bandage, made sure he didn't rip it off, and gave him his shots. Her grandfather had taught her all that when she was young, so it wasn't difficult. In the evening, she looked out the window. She was thirsty, but Jenny had emptied all the supplies. Where are you, Jenny? Silly girl. Like when I was a kid and I resented you and wanted to break everything I had just because you didn't get it. And now you'll have a criminal record. Maddie sighed heavily. It was a shame that her sister felt that way about her. Only now did she realize that Jenny had been fine with her dying in the fire. After all, if it hadn't been for the dog, she might have been burned alive. It got scary and empty. She wanted to go up to her grandmother and talk to her about it, but instead she just looked at her portrait. She was already in bed when the phone rang. Hello, Maddie. It's Evan from the hospital. I wanted to check on Kat's health, she heard, and caught herself smiling. Hi, I'm so glad you called. Kat's asleep. You know, he keeps rubbing the bandage. It must be the stitches itching. Otherwise, he's fine. So you'll have to come and see me again. We'll put a collar on him that'll keep him from scratching the stitches until they heal. Maddie was excited about this new opportunity to see Evan. She picked out her nicest pants for her meeting with him, and she let her hair down. She looked much better now than she had when they first met. Evan put a collar around the dog's neck, and Maddie was about to leave, but Evan stopped her. You know, I rarely call our hospital clients in the evenings. I rarely faint, and I rarely tell strangers everything about myself. Maddie smiled. Well, I'll call you again, unless of course you're busy. Do you have a husband or something? The doctor stammered with embarrassment. He was standing right next to her, and he was a head taller than Medina, and she seemed so small and helpless beside him. I don't have a husband. I don't seem to have one either, and I wouldn't mind if you called. Evan walked Maddie to the door, wished the dog well, and in the evening called. This time they talked for 2 hours. It turned out they had a lot in common. Evan was an orphan, like Maddie. He made it on his own. He was in a car accident, almost died, and he's still recovering. He's afraid to drive. Maddie told him how lonely she was in the big house, how she was afraid of fire, how she spent nights checking to see if the gas was off in the kitchen, if the fence was on fire again. After a week of late-night phone calls, Evan picked Maddie up in his car and drove her into town. They both didn't like diners, so they ate shawarma on the boardwalk and were perfectly happy. "You know, you're very strong. You are. You've been through so much and lost so much. How are you still so great alone?" he asked. "I didn't have time for romance. I got caught up in myself, taking care of my grandmother. And now, I'm just confused. I have no one left, and I'm glad you're here." "Then you can rest easy. I'm not gonna leave you for the next 60 to 70 years. And there, as it turns out already. That night he kissed her, and it was like in her youth. Just as sharp, just as vivid. Maddie was ashamed of her happiness, embarrassed that she wasn't wearing mourning for her grandmother, but flitting around the property like a butterfly. "I know what you would say. Maddie walked up to Grandma's portrait tonight. You would say I can't waste time and I shouldn't waste it on mourning. You tell me to go to him and be happy. The day after tomorrow will be 40 days since you've been gone. Although, I feel like you're with me. You'll always be in my heart, Grandma." Maddie kissed the portrait, sighing intermittently. A tear burned her cheek. It occurred to her in that moment that if Jenny hadn't come to visit her, maybe Grandma Cassie would still be alive. After all, she was the one who wouldn't give her the pills and kept talking about the will. She was the one who brought her to the end of the line. And now she was in the lockup, waiting for her trial. That night, Evan and Maddie were walking down the avenue. Maddie was silent, thinking about the upcoming wake. Evan held her hand. "Why don't you come over? I'd feel better if you were there with me," Maddie asked him. "It's embarrassing. I didn't know your grandmother. There'll be rumors. Why don't I come over right after? I'll stay with you. Just watch movies with you. Or we could stay at my place. Till the morning. I'm not being vulgar, just being supportive." Maddie hugged him. Evan was her only ray of light. She thanked God for sending her Evan, and for sending her a little lame puppy back then. Maddie had never imagined, when she saved the puppy, that her act would be a life-changing one. With all this thinking, Maddie didn't notice the time had passed. Evan needed to get home. Their evening kisses had become routine, and so welcome. The wake went well. People talked more about Jenny than the late Cassie. The whole village was shocked at the news that her sister wanted to burn down the house with Maddie, along with the livestock and the guard. "What a greedy, wicked woman," said one of the invitees. Maddie wanted to object, but realized that those were the words that best described her sister. Meanwhile, she was on trial. If she hadn't set the house on fire, things might have been different, but she did. One phone call that ruined her life. What she didn't recognize was that she was being sentenced by someone she could call her own uncle. Her relative, was the judge at her trial, and he gave her probation, but only because Maddie testified in her defense. A year later, Maddie and Evan stood at the grave of Cassie's grandmother and David's grandfather. Maddie had a visible belly and a wedding ring on her finger. "Do you think they're there with Grandpa?" she asked, tossing back her long black hair. "Of course they are. How could they not be? I'm sure of it. Those who love each other won't break up because of such a nonsense as death." If you like the story, please support me with the thumbs up button, and to learn about the release of new interesting stories, when you subscribe, click the bell. All the best to you.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.